Hi, and welcome to the Aerostich Podcast. I'm here today with Phil Stalboerger. He's the Minnesota writer and full-time professional legislative lobbyist who put together the legalization of lane sharing in Minnesota over the last 3 or 4 months. It goes into effect a year from now, July 1st, 2025, but he was the engineer that aligned the planets to make Minnesota unexpectedly the sixth state in the United States to have legal lane splitting. Hi, Phil, and welcome to the Aerostich Podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Well, thank you for doing this. The theme of this podcast basically is going to be how a rider who wants to be able to lane split or lane share or filter in other states, how did you do this? And before we get too far into the how-tos, I'd like you to introduce yourself, talk about your history as a rider.
Great. Phil Stalboerger, born and raised in Minnesota, grew up in Cold Spring, Minnesota. Number 4 of 5 boys. My father had a Yamaha YG1 motorcycle. My brother still has it in the garage as we speak. And so kind of grew up with motorcycles, ATVs, not necessarily owning them, but kind of at my disposal. And so kind of fell in love with riding motorcycles. And truth be told, when my brothers were away from the house, I would take my older brother's bike out and teach myself how to ride. And so my very first bike was when I got my license, I turned 16. Rather than buy a car, I bought a motorcycle and bought my brother's 650 Honda Nighthawk. And absolutely loved it, and kind of fell in love with motorcycling from then on. So kind of it runs deep in my roots, if you will. And my mother could never say she didn't want us to have a motorcycle because my dad had one. So a lot of my brothers ride to this day, and my current selection of bikes is a culmination of a lot of different paths. But BMWs definitely are one of them.
Do you still have the Hawk?
I do not have the Hawk, and I kind of wish I did. It's the shaft drive, it was 83 Nighthawk. Love that bike, still to this day.
The Aerostich engineer I introduced you to a few minutes ago has one that he rode to work on today. It's downstairs next to our building, and he has 2 of them.
Those are great bikes. Great bikes.
So how does that intersect with your career history as a lobbyist?
Yeah, so, I kind of gave up riding, if you will, when my kids were little. I have 2 boys. One is a senior up here in Duluth, Minnesota, college. And, motorcycling has always been a part of me. And when I got back into it, I rode my brother's 2005 BMW Boxer Cup replica, and that kind of gave me the passion to get into more motorcycling. And honestly, I never really thought about melding the 2 together in terms of my career as, being in the government affairs, public affairs world. To me, they never really, didn't really think about it. I thought about it, my God, it's just a pipe dream, not going to do it. And so, I got into politics. I was 19, and I was a pre-med major at St. John's. And I was taking a political science course, and my professor said, you should get into kind of public policy, government affairs. And I said, why? And he says, well, I see something in you where you can articulate both sides of every issue. You're not argumentative, but you have the skill to be able to work through issues. So you should get into this. And so I did. And
at 19?
19.
20 years old?
Yeah.
Wow.
I changed my major as a sophomore from pre-med to political science.
Wow.
And my mother's a nurse. I have a brother that's a physical therapist. Brother's at Mayo Clinic. Healthcare background. And I'll never forget. My mom said, "What do you can do with political science?" And I said, "Hold this. I'll show you." And I had this vision. And my professor and I literally put a roadmap together of go work at a state capitol, go work in the administration, and then go into the private sector. And that's exactly what I did. At 19, I started working in the state capitol as an intern. Year later, I was a senior at St. John's, and the particular legislator said, "Why don't you come back and work for me full time?" And I said, "Okay." And I was, academically, I was almost done with my school, and so I was able to graduate college in 3.5 years and start working at the state capitol when I was 21.
So I don't know your age. You don't have to say your age. But
51.
51. But so you've been walking the halls of the Minnesota State Capitol for all these years.
Yes.
So when you walk down the hall, hi Phil, how's your wife, how's your kids,
Yep.
Those are your family members, not just the elected legislators, but the staff people and everybody. You know everybody there.
Yeah, and I'll say, being a former staff myself, you always hear the adage that, Congress or politics is run by 19-year-olds. It's very true. Young people are doing a lot of the work. You get to see how sausage is being made, whether you like it or not. And so, you're kind of in the trenches with these people, and they're lifelong friends. And to your point, I do consider them family. I've been walking the halls of the Capitol since I was 19, and still have friends up there and still love it.
So that's, to me, seems like one of the two key ingredients to getting lane splitting in Minnesota. The way you pulled it off, number one, is you knew the place. You knew the doors to open. You knew the people to talk to. And that's, without someone in a state legislative capital, nobody could do that. That's one of the two keys to getting this what happened.
I would agree. However, in today's political environment, there's a lot of new legislators at the state capitol, every state capitol across the country. And it's not just, you're going to have new players all the time, but it's also, how do you carry yourself? What's your history? Who do you know? And how do you know them? So in this particular case in Minnesota, we had a lot of new legislators that I didn't know, frankly, had met for the first time. There's some I still don't know. And, because of the turnover in politics, again, it's not always who you know, it's also what you know and how you meld those two together. Mm-hmm. And frankly, a lot of the staff that I got to work with at the state capitol, once they kind of knew I was former staff, they kind of go, okay, you're good. I can trust you.
Right.
And man, you talk about, public policy, politics, it's based on trust. And that was kind of, job number one. So a lot of new legislators I got to meet.
Maybe this is off to the side. You can tell me if this question is not right. Minnesota right now has all three, both upper and lower house and the governorship are all controlled by the same political party.
Correct.
And in one of those legislative parts, the lower house, I think, is one vote apart from being
Senate.
The Senate is one vote apart.
Yep.
How big do you think that is? If you're in Ohio or Indiana or Pennsylvania or wherever, and all three units are not in the same party, is that a big problem?
Well, yes and no, potentially, but. Here's and being in Duluth, Minnesota, I will say this. One of my mentors was former Senator Sam Solon, the late Sam Solon. He was bipartisan before bipartisan was a thing, and I learned a lot from him. I also learned a lot from former Republican Speaker of the House, Dave Jennings. He was also very bipartisan. So I kind of grew up with this bipartisan mentality, and some people who really get into astronomy and stuff like that, they said, well, you're a Libra, and therefore you're all about justice and blah, blah, blah. So you can see why you're kind of middle of the road, et cetera. But I do live my life in a bipartisan manner. So I didn't necessarily care that we had a trifecta of state government. Now, at the end of the day, that is what helped, certainly.
But you think it could be done in other states where that didn't exist?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
that's what I was getting at.
No, I think it has to. Because motorcycle safety isn't a partisan issue.
Right.
It shouldn't be.
No, it is not at all.
Right.
So I guess the next thing on my notes is to talk about your accident experience. When, how long ago, the consequences to your family and your wife, and all that stuff.
So it was October 2nd, 2022. It was a Sunday morning. Minnesota Vikings were playing in London. Got to watch the game early, and so by 10:30, 11 o'clock, the game's over. It's like, now what am I do with my Sunday? Because my Sundays are all about, frankly, watching football and hanging out with family, et cetera. So, game is over, and I was about to turn 50, right? And so I was tinkering around in the garage with my motorcycles. We can talk about what's in my current stable. But I was monkeying around the garage, and my wife came outside. She's like, "Hey, want to go for coffee?" And I'm like, "I'm all geared up." But I'm like, "Well, either I got to go in and shower, or you hop on the bike." And she said, "Well, I haven't been on a bike in 2 years." And she has all the gear, but she just kind of doesn't love riding. She thinks it's dangerous, etc. So she goes, "You know what? I have all the gear. Let's go." So I say there's 2 seasons in Minnesota. I think we all know that, right? Road construction and winter.
Right.
And so, we were trying to avoid road construction. You just can't in the metro area. And so we were going north on Cedar Avenue right in front of the Mall of America, trying to go west to get out to the western suburbs to go have coffee. That was our goal. And so I was coming up to a long line of stop and go traffic, and I had nowhere to go because I was on a exit ramp, etc. So bike's in neutral. I aim my tire to the right side of the bumper, so I give myself an exit strategy should something happen. Do all the things I've been taught since I was 16 to be a better rider.
Yeah, you've had sorry to interrupt, but you had a bunch of rider safety training classes and stuff.
Yeah, the BMW MOA, Motorcycle Owners Association of America, is an incredible organization. So when I go to rallies, people always ask me, "What do you do at a BMW rally?" And I said, "Well, you've heard of Sturgis, right?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "The complete opposite." We're a bunch of nerds who like to sit around and look at gear and test ride new motorcycles and learn how to be safer riders. So a couple years ago, I actually took the motorcycle safety training that was put on by the motorcycle safety folks, many of them which are former police in California. And so I take safety training whenever I can. And I'm a firm believer in being a better rider, safer rider every year. Yes, I'm 51. I got to keep honing my skills, and just riding is good, but you got to learn more.
So you were very experienced and safety oriented.
Correct. Yep. And I'm a firm believer in ATGAT, all the gear, all the time, no matter where I'm going. If I'm going to get a cup of coffee or whatever, and so we were in full gear, head to toe. I was on my 2007 R1200 RT.
That's for the audience. That's a big touring bike.
Correct.
With windshield, saddlebags, all the luxury.
And rear top case as well, which my wife liked because it was a backrest.
Yeah.
And also kind of feel a little more encompassed.
Right.
So was pretty much at a stop, and also I could hear screeching tires behind me, and kind of before I can even look in the mirror, was basically rear-ended, and I'm guessing he's probably going about 30 miles an hour. The left side case was basically stuck in his grill. He hit us so hard, but it was like a billiard shot or a pinball shot where he hit us and we went to the right, he went to the left.
Luckily, you were pointed so you didn't get collapsed in between the two vehicles, or that would have been much worse.
Absolutely. And thankfully, it was a Honda Civic or Nissan Sentra, something smaller. So he almost kind of slid underneath the case, but her leg was there, and so got the bike to the side of the road, didn't lay it down, and got the bike to the side of the road. And I was convinced I was going to get hit with another, somebody coming to the right side of me.
Right.
And got to the side, and I knew she, unzipped. She wanted her boot off, so I started unzipping the boot, and it was a compound fracture of her tibia. So I'm like, okay, we're going to leave that for the authorities when they get here. So I knew she had some extensive leg injuries. So off-duty police officer was in the realm of traffic. She stopped to help out, and she was an angel in this whole process. So, long story short, 7 broken bones in her leg.
Wow.
It's a tib nail, which is a 10 millimeter rod down your shin bone. 3 screws up on top, 2 on the bottom. Pretty invasive procedure, and the rest of all the bones have since healed. But the thing that struck me, pardon the pun, but was the surgeon at Hennepin County Medical Center afterwards said, "This is I think it was the 9th tib nail he had done that week."
Wow.
9th. And he said 8 of them were motorcycle accidents from people getting rear-ended in motorcycle accidents. And he said, "I don't know what's going on the roads, but you guys are all getting rear-ended." And
it's a distracted driving problem with everybody texting on their smartphones and not see all my life as a rider. When I come up to a stoplight on a street with traffic, or when I come on a freeway situation where there's congestion ahead, so all the cars it's like an accordion. All the cars kind of telescope together up to a stop or going slower. But I'm in my rearview mirror all the time going, what kind of a vehicle is behind me?
Absolutely.
And who's coming up? And I am hand on the clutch, and my foot is down on the right-hand side so that my other side where the shift lever is, I can, hopefully if I see something that doesn't look right in the rearview mirror, hopefully I can get out of the way. I've been doing that since I was a kid.
Yep.
And most experienced riders are, but the incidence statistically of the increase of distracted driving of these kind of accidents it's exploded.
Right. Absolutely. And so it was amazing to be, and I'd never been in a crash before. I did a podcast for the MOA recently, and Wes Fleming said it's a crash, not an accident, because you didn't do anything wrong, because you were hit, et cetera. So splitting hairs on the definition of what it was, but it kind of got me thinking, like, man, that could have been avoided, not just by the driver not being distracted. We all know people are more distracted now than ever. Our vehicles are getting bigger. Thankfully I wasn't hit by a SUV or a pickup truck. Right. So I had all these things kind of going against me, but there are a lot of things going in my favor, which was a smaller car, thankfully. But yeah, he was distracted. It doesn't really matter. It's gonna have an impact no matter how big the vehicle is.
So to me, this seems like, as I mentioned earlier, that there are two key ingredients. One is your familiarity with the legislative process in Minnesota and the people who make the sausage.
Yeah.
And the other is the huge increase in these exact type of accidents is a public health, public safety problem.
Absolutely.
And when you package it up and wrap it in a bow around public safety, around public health, it's a lot more sellable as a legislative accomplishment than just saying, oh, it's one less car, we're going to save the planet, it's efficient, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't go anywhere in the legislation. But when it comes to public health and public safety, everybody bipartisanly lines up behind it. So those are the two pieces that this year you had.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And to your point, walking the halls of the Capitol on February 15th, I think was the first day of session, it was a big, state chamber event. And so many people are coming up to me saying, how are you doing? How's your wife? I heard you in this accident. They knew about it. It was kind of not a buzz, but people were like, how are you doing? How's it going? And legislators that didn't know me were like, oh, what happened? And so it became a story. And we all know, unfortunately, sometimes these kind of behaviors change laws, change people's minds.
Yep.
And that's exactly what this was. It kind of became this. And, Senator Scott Dibble, chair of the Transportation Committee, who I've known for probably 20 years, looked at me and he said, I introduced this bill to allow lane splitting or lane filtering about 10 years ago, but it didn't go anywhere. Right. And the motorcycle community wasn't organized. Nobody was really ahead of it. It was just kind of him that introduced the bill because he was in an accident as a youngster 20 years prior.
But the epidemic of rear ends hadn't yet really started.
True.
At that time.
Absolutely. Yep. So, that conversation, I think, drove a lot of people to say, oh, maybe this might make sense to do this. And so he said, let's introduce a bill and for discussion purposes only and just, get the conversation going and
see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of where it all started.
How much of a life-changing experience has this been with your marriage and with your wife's health?
Oh, no question. I mean, you think about when something like this happens, you're never going to be the same again. Both physically, emotionally.
Right.
It changes your life.
Did you have post-traumatic counseling for this or anything like that? Or your wife?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can assume anytime you hear screeching brakes or you see brake lights, you're going to kind of tense up a little bit. I will say, since the accident, I'm even more diligent about being a safer rider myself. I am always, even the 2.5 hour ride up here, even if it's freeway, which isn't always ideal. I'm always watching 2-3 cars ahead. I'm also looking in my rearview mirror more.
Right.
And I'm probably paying even more attention now than I was before. So for me, I've kind of turned the catastrophe into how do I be better, how do I be safer? But that's not enough for me because I need everybody else to be safer as well. And that's where the law comes in. But there's certainly some PTSD.
How's your wife doing?
She'll never be the same. Her leg will always continue to either have pain, swelling. The screws have been removed just as an update. But you still have a 10 millimeter rod on your shin bone, which never feels good.
Right.
And anybody that's had this injury before, which is fairly typical for athletes, et cetera, that have this tib nail, it's not comfortable. And so she'll always have swelling. She'll always have pain. So it has affected her life negatively more than mine.
So the planets did align, and it looked like people weren't like laughing you out of their office when you came by with this request.
Well, some were. I mean, honestly, those that are experienced motorcyclists would say, "Oh, yeah, but it's pretty dangerous." Others that I would talk to literally would laugh and say, "There's no way we're going to pass this."
Well, how did you respond to those two? Sorry to interrupt. But
yeah, no, it's okay.
Your response in the face of those two reactions would be very useful to our audience, I think.
Yeah. So we all know motorcycling is dangerous. You swing your leg over the bike. It's a dangerous
activity.
Think it's not a sport. It's not. It's lifestyle. And so just by knowing it's dangerous is one thing, but two, looking at data was the biggest thing. So you can tell a motorcyclist who understands this saying, yeah, it might be dangerous, but have you thought about all the benefits of it? And so the benefit really was anybody that laughed and said that's way too dangerous, I would say, look, there is a study from California, University of California, Berkeley, that shows when you are in between vehicles in stop-and-go traffic, you are actually safer because you're not going to get rear-ended. And rear-ended accidents, as we just talked about, are probably more detrimental than your normal, fender bender, if you will. So we started bringing out the data and literally had the data in my hand at all times. So when somebody said, "Oh, that sounds dangerous," well, here's actually a study. And I was rear-ended, and you know my story, but here's some data that shows had we had this law in place 2 years ago, I wouldn't have had this accident.
Did the legislators you talked to who were resisting you, were they aware that California has had lane splitting from the beginning of cars and roads out there, with the California Highway Patrol using the lane splitting and then regular riders following, and that there was never a law prohibiting it? So people always just did it until 7 years ago,
2017.
17?
Yeah.
So was any of the legislators who were not, I'm sure you talked to a few that were also riders, but was the typical legislator aware of this story in California and this history?
Well, first, there's no typical legislator, right? Right. There's 201 that all have different experiences. The ones that had absolutely zero experience riding a bike, and I would just say that the author of the bill, Senator Julia Coleman, had family that rode, so she was familiar with it, but she wasn't familiar with the fact that there are 5 other states that have done this, that there are 5 other states, they're all different. I think most people know that it's allowed in California, and those that know about it assume that these crazy motorcyclists are driving 90 miles an hour, through traffic,
taking cuts,
and it's the OK Corral, right?
Right.
So even sometimes that negative connotivity comes with it. But those that had been in California have seen it or grew up there. Senator Jeff Howe from St. Cloud said, "I used to live in California. It's the best thing since sliced bread." And he was another huge advocate for us.
Saves a tremendous amount of time if you live in Los Angeles or San Francisco or San Diego, where there's a lot of congestion. I've ridden in California probably 20 times over my riding lifetime, and I do it. And what happens all over the world, not just in California, but where there's congestion and where smaller, more nimble vehicles naturally and organically sort of filter between the clumsier, larger vehicles in congested situations, is it's relatively, people who are riding for useful purposes, for transportation and for commuting and stuff like that, those people naturally want to ride in as safe a behavioral way as they possibly can, because they're just going to the grocery store in India, or they're just going to work in Brazil or something. And all over the world, with the exception of America, that's how most motorcycling is consumed, by people who don't have a car, or if you're in a big congested Asian city, it's not practical to have a car, so everybody has a small lightweight motorcycle or a bicycle, or they use public transportation. Filtering saves time and is done in a safe manner. America's a different culture because thanks to Henry Ford and the wide adoption of the Model T car, we as a country and as a culture were the only place in the world that went directly to automobiles.
Right.
And motorcycles became recreational toys and sports vehicles in 1915, 1917. So today in California, you've got a lot of people with loud bikes with no mufflers or sports bikes or zooming down the road between the lanes. But what's happened over the years of my experience, about 40, 50 years riding in California, is there's more and more quote-unquote useful, normal transportation riders, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And the people in the cars do what the people in cars are doing in Asia or India or Europe. They're seeing the headlight of an approaching motorcycle in their mirror, and they actually move over a few inches to give the rider passage. And that's happening now in California since it's been legalized to a much higher degree than it was 30, 40 years ago when everybody was doing it and I was doing it. But today it's legit. And the law that they passed now has produced evidence, numbers, that it's reducing injuries and that it's reducing.
Absolutely.
It's a public health benefit to allow it.
Yeah.
Once the adjustment has been made. And toward the end of this podcast, I hope we'll have time to talk about how that's going to happen in Minnesota because there is a transition when you introduce new public policy and laws that takes people a while to get used. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about hunting and fishing game laws or traffic laws or any kind of law.
Well, the irony is I was riding through California right after that was it officially allowed, and so people said, "Are you going to lane split in California?" I said, "No, it's probably not going to do that." And I think I was there in August, and it was 110 degrees. I'm leaving L.A. Had just purchased a motorcycle, and I'm riding up through Salt Lake City and back to Minneapolis, hitting the BMW rally on the way home. And it was 110 degrees, and literally cars would move to the side.
Right.
It's amazing. I mean,
it becomes normalized, and
right.
it doesn't matter whether you're in Mumbai, India, or Paris, France, or Quito, Ecuador. Once it becomes normalized, everybody does share the lane. Everybody does get along. Because that's our human instinct, is to take care of each other, not to fight with each other. We raise children. We raise families. The instinct to teach and to care for people is one of our deepest human instincts. And once this is codified, it takes a while, but the rebelliousness it filters out.
Yeah.
So
we'll get there.
Yeah, we will get there. We'll talk about that a little later. I guess now you're wandering around the state of Minnesota Capitol trying to sell this. Yeah. Got some stories?
Sure do. So of course, some legislators are like, "We're not doing this. It's not time for this. It's too crazy. Have you been to these, third world countries, et cetera?" I'm like, okay, let's think about what we have in Minnesota, et cetera. It really was, I'll say, I think you kind of, it's a aligning of the stars, right? And I think I was amazed that the number of legislators that rode, literally, pardon the pun, filtered to the forefront
of the legislative body.
Yeah.
They came forward.
Yeah, they would see me in the hallway and say, "Hey, I heard we might be doing this. Is this true?" And like, "Well, it's up to you, but yes, we're going to do this." And Representative Gilman was another one, and she said, "Hey, I ride and I want to do this." And she's in the House. She's like, "What can I do?" And so you have a bill in the House, a bill in the Senate. And pretty soon you have people wanting to sign on to the bill because they're excited about this.
This was completely out of left field.
Completely. Again, session started February 15th. And if you don't have a bill introduced by February 15th, you're probably not going to get a hearing. I didn't have a bill jacketed yet. And so I literally started calling people and talking to Senator Dibble and talking to new legislators I hadn't met yet, like Senator Coleman, Representative Gilman, Representative Cha from Woodbury, who rides bikes. And so I'm talking to all these legislators, and I'm like, "All right, let's get a bill. And I'll never forget knowing the legislative process. I'm like, I need more than just my story. We have the data, and we have legislators, but I still need more. and more being, I need other people to come forward and support this. And so we finally get a bill jacketed in the Senate side, and I called my local BMW club, and I said, hey, we're introducing a bill, and by now we're end of February. Deadlines are coming up pretty quick. We can talk about the legislative process later, but if you don't get your bill heard and get it through a committee, it's not going anywhere. And I said, hey, we're introducing a bill on lane filtering, lane splitting. I need you guys to be doing X, Y, Z, which is wherever you live, contact your legislator. Just write them an email. Call their office.
At this stage, was the draft of a bill in hand, the language, and if it was, what did it say?
I didn't even have a bill jacketed yet. I was still waiting for the revisor's office to get me the jacket.
So you didn't have anything on paper that said this is what it's going to kind of look like.
It was a concept. And this is not how I normally would do this, right?
Okay.
This is how it happened.
Okay.
Normally you've got a bill jacket, you've got a bill number, you have a summary, and people can start talking about it. And I talked about this in concept, saying, hey, we're going to be doing this. I'll get you the bill when we get it.
Okay.
But I needed that, because we were so short on time, I needed almost to happen simultaneously. So before there was even a bill number, I just said, told our BMW club, just send a letter saying, I support lane splitting.
I remember when you contacted me to use all of my emails to all my riders that I knew in Minnesota.
We didn't have a number yet. So it literally was a concept. And once we got the bill jacket number, then you have support Senate file, whatever it is. And then it's easier to grasp. So then my next call was to you and to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm getting this bill jacketed. And what do you think? And I knew, you're a legend in this arena. And I'm like, I knew where you stood, but I'm like, I need some support. I need some quote unquote corporate support, some grassroots support. I need a coalition, and I need it now. Well, what can we do? And so, once you and your organization said, yes, we're in.
And Jed Duncan, the Minneapolis-based
yes, and then I called, and Jed I'd met, because during COVID, I was hanging out at BMW Motorcycles of Richfield in the Twin Cities, and Jed would come by, and we kind of, shoot the breeze, and he knew what I did. And he and I would always talk about, hey, we should do this legislatively. We should do this legislatively. And I said, yeah, I mean.
So you were starting a week later to hear representatives say, hey, I just heard from one of my constituents within a week, right?
Yeah.
And that mattered.
That matters huge. Yeah. Because, again, people know me and kind of go, hey, you're talking about this motorcycle stuff. I've got constituents.
But you're just not making it up out of thin air.
Exactly.
Somebody called me last week. Yeah, right. I got a call.
And that is, I will say, it's not they're all important, but you need those individuals, whether you're in Duluth, St. Cloud, Woodbury, wherever you are, you need to be calling your legislator saying, I support this.
Right.
And keep it simple, right? Don't be talking about a whole litany of other things, but just keep it to one topic.
Right. So you've got the familiarity with the legislature and how laws get passed, and you've got this airtight public health, public safety case, and the personal experience, and it's moving fast, and people are starting to call the legislators, their representatives.
Yep.
What happened next?
By now, a couple things. One, I would say, amongst all my lobbying friends, they're all kind of watching out for me, kind of going, hey, we like what you're doing here, and we want to help you. And so if there was ever any discussion, remarks about this issue, people would kind of go, hey, so-and-so is just talking about this in the corner of the hallway. You should make sure you go talk to them. And so I had people, I wouldn't say working for me, but they were trying to help me, saying, we want to see this pass. And there's no huge corporations behind this effort. It really was grassroots. So,
and it was public health.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because for years I've talked about how the psychological, sociological, it's a social good, benefit for everybody. That doesn't work. Public health does.
It really did. I mean, especially when you have a story like we talked about. So we had the data, and so the thing started moving. All of a sudden, there's a bill hearing. I contacted Jed and I said, hey, I need a couple of your riders to show up in full gear at a hearing. Visuals help. And so, to your point about being hot on a motorcycle, and we can all talk about, I know there's a a death in California due to heat exhaustion on a motorcycle. And so that was one of my talking points, but we never got that far because it was the public health and the public safety that just kind of resonated with everybody.
Everybody, that was the key.
But when you show up at any room outside, not outside, and you're wearing full gear, including a helmet, people are going to say, aren't you kind of warm? Exactly. Now be 110 degrees.
And the only answer is from the movie Forrest Gump. You just slowly look them right in the eye and say, yes, I am.
Yes, let me keep moving. Put a fan on me, please.
Let me split the lanes.
Yeah, exactly. So help us stay closer. So I had written up talking points for legislators if they were ever asked why you're doing this, and say, here's why. And so they were armed with the facts and the data. That's half the battle. And so when we go into a hearing, legislators would have the facts and the figures in advance. Now, there's always going to be naysayers. You're always going to have people that are going to say, nope, too dangerous, we're going to try to take this out. So we did have a couple efforts from legislators to say, nope, we're going to take this out of the bill, we're going to make it a study.
Explain what take it out means. I know what an omnibus bill means, and that's how legislation gets done in most states.
Yeah.
And explain what it is and why why it's the tactic that's used to pass legislation is something called omnibus bills and what they are.
Thank you. I skipped over that. So we had the bill moving in the Senate as a standalone bill.
Right.
Senator Dipple had an omnibus transportation bill.
And what is that?
An omnibus means you have a whole bunch of different ideas all put together in one package. So they might not all be related to motorcycles. It could be trains, planes, and automobiles, but they're all under the auspices of it's all transportation related. And so it got amended into the omnibus transportation bill with other probably 150, 200 other ideas on transportation.
Affecting pedestrians and bicycles and fire trucks and everything.
Yeah, railroads, you name it. Yeah. And so now I'm competing with everybody else in this bill to stay in there because everybody's kind of like trying to protect it.
And why does legislators use omnibus bills? Why are they used?
One, it's efficient. So if you think about all these ideas in one bill, it's more efficient to talk about here are the 50 things in this bill versus here's one, here's another one, and do it separately. So they put them all together, and if there's a money attached to it, which ours did, we had money set aside for an educational campaign from the Motorcycle Safety Fund. Now it's a budget issue, so now that provision needs to go into an omnibus bill because it has budget ramifications. And if you're the chair of a committee that has jurisdiction over a budget, i.e. Department of Transportation or Public Safety, you have to be able to show here's the balance.
So you're working to keep it in there and not get it thrown out.
Right.
That's the next month of your life is to keep it in there during this process to the deadline?
Month and a half,
Month and a half. And then when you succeeded, then the governor only has one piece of paper to sign.
Right. Yep.
So it's
exactly.
fast. Yeah.
Right. Now, once we were in one omnibus bill, it kind of got amended to another omnibus bill. So the bill number kept changing. The concept didn't necessarily, but now we're into a bigger. Now it's transportation,
healthcare.
Yeah, you name it.
They merged the transportation omnibus into the general omnibus.
Yeah, it was one huge.
I heard it was
bill.
like 1,400 pages or 1,900 pages or something this year.
Right. It was kind of ridiculous, actually.
Somebody said, it was on the news, that this was one of the toughest legislative battles because there were so many controversial things stirred into this stew of bills.
Couldn't agree more. It was my 31st legislative session. By far the ugliest, by far the most divisive.
But not because of the motorcycle piece, but because of all this other stuff.
Yeah, it was more the process and the procedure of putting all these things together. So the omnibus bill sometimes gets a bad rap. Sometimes it gets some. There needs to be some transparency with what's all in it.
And as far as you know, this is the way it's done in almost every state, basically.
Not necessarily the way Minnesota did it, but in terms of omnibus bills, every state's going to have omnibus transportation, omnibus healthcare. They don't always get merged together, but yes.
So if a rider is looking to organize this in Indiana or Pennsylvania or Kentucky, they're going to go through this whole mess, basically.
Most likely, you're going to introduce it as a standalone bill, and eventually it'll get most likely morphed into something else with related topics. So yes, you should expect to be fighting with everybody else.
So is this the time in this podcast for you to recite what the bill actually was said?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it changed from the initial, when we talked, I guess I didn't explain what was in the bill in the beginning. So the language changed, and again, there are some really smart people, some really smart staff and legislators that really want to make sure they do this right the first time. And so when you amend current statute to basically overtake a vehicle in a given lane, et cetera, it sounds very technical. And so over time, the language did change a little bit, but essentially it allows for lane filtering or lane splitting, but for it to be lane splitting, which is when traffic is moving. So if you think of filtering, if you're at a stop sign, you can filter to the front to get to the front of the traffic.
And when the light changes, you just go ahead of the cars because
Right.
motorcycles accelerate more
Quicker,
quickly.
right.
Even when you're not racing, you're just
Right. Yep.
yeah. It just
And I don't race either, by the way.
Right.
And so when it's lane splitting, it's in moving traffic, stop and go. Even if stop and go, you're still going. And
Right.
so there is a speed limit of 25 miles an hour over this maximum.
Maximum.
You cannot go more than 15 miles an hour over
what prevailing traffic is doing.
Correct. So if you're going 10 miles an hour, you can go 25, which happens to be the max.
Right.
So maximum of 25 miles an hour. So if traffic's going 50 miles an hour, you cannot lane split.
So it's really about urban,
Yeah.
congested situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Correct.
And you can go on the right shoulder or between the two if it's a multi-lane.
Multi-lane.
Either way.
Right. Right.
And who put in the piece about penalties for interfering with this?
I believe that was Senator Dibble that put that in there. Wanted to make sure that if somebody is trying to impede a motorcyclist from abiding by the law, that motorist is a misdemeanor.
It's a traffic
Traffic
ticket.
violation.
Should anybody be able
Right.
to catch up with them?
And I believe we're the only state in the country to have that in state law.
That's
So.
really a cool piece of it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then there was $200,000, from the Motorcycle Safety Fund to educate the general public on the new law.
But that's going to be important.
Yes, and I've reached out to public
yeah.
safety, and I said, we'd love to help be a part of this. Other groups like Law Tiger and others are going to be putting out their own video
Right.
to make sure they know. So I think we're going to have a good educational campaign to make sure people understand what it is. However, I think
It's going to take years.
it's going to take years,
It's
and even
gonna-
if
it's
an
gonna be a
educational
bump,
campaign,
it's going to be a bumpy road.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah.
The educational campaign's not going to cure every ail of our traffic society. So,
But it's a guarantee that the statistics of rear-ended motorcyclists is going to go down day one.
has to.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to see that play out over the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
And gradually, knock on wood, the public will accept, as they do with bicycle riders,
Right.
that the bicycles naturally filter along the shoulder and between the cars in urban areas.
Right.
And eventually motorcyclists will join them.
I will say, even during the hearing, we actually had a couple of state legislators that said, well, I lane split all the time, so I don't get rear-ended
On a bicycle.
on a motorcycle.
Oh,
So they're admitting that they're breaking the law in front of a committee, but they knew the impact that this was going to have. They said, I support it. I'm already doing it. But what I fear, though, is, and I've heard about this from a few folks, that people are already doing it before it's legal.
Yeah.
And you're frustrating the general mass of car drivers who don't know it's legal yet. So I want to make sure we're doing this right, and hopefully we're being smart.
when I was starting Aerostich, I went out to California several times on my motorcycle to talk to the editors of the motorcycle magazines who were all based in Los Angeles. And I experienced lane splitting, and I tried it, and I got a little good at it, and not great, but good enough. And it saved me hours of time getting from one guy's editorial office to the next, because Los Angeles is a very sprawled out city with a lot of congestion. So I came back here in a little town like Duluth, and even little towns like Duluth have congested situations if there's a construction area or whatever. And about a week after I'd returned from my second or third trip to California, I was a young rider, and there was 3 blocks of stop and go creeping along traffic with a flagman. And I thought, well, this is perfect. It was a surface street, not a freeway, but a one-way, multi-lane surface street here. And I go, and it's a hot summer day, and I gently put the bike into first gear, and I creep along the side, and and a lot of the cars didn't have air conditioning, or drivers had the window down, and people were shaking their fist and yelling at me, "Hey, don't take cuts," or whatever.
Yeah.
That was the last time I did it here, because I recognized how offensive it was to the average driver.
Right.
Changing that will take a while.
Man, I'll say, especially in Minnesota, we are the number one state for passive aggressive drivers.
Yeah, Minnesota, nice,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to take some time, because everybody wants to get to the cabin first,
Yeah,
right? Nobody
right.
wants to sit in traffic any more than anybody else. But yeah, it'll take a while for, I think, Minnesotans to put down their guard and say, okay, please go ahead.
It might be a generation. It might take
Yeah,
a long
it
time,
might.
because it does look, when you're sitting in a car, like someone's taking cuts.
Yeah.
And you're just basically getting out of everybody's way. You're doing what a narrow, nimble vehicle can do naturally. It's
Yeah.
not, when you're in a car and somebody goes by between lanes, it looks dangerous. When you're on the bike and you see that 45 to 50 inch wide, or whatever it is, strip of asphalt in front of you between the cars, it looks safe, because it is.
Right.
Because all you have to do is pay attention. You can even see car drivers looking at you. You can see their eyes in their rearview mirrors, especially with semis.
Mm-hmm.
They know you're coming. Your headlight
That's
is
right.
on, and
Yep.
all they have to do is say to themselves, "Well, this is one less car."
Yeah.
So it takes
Yeah.
time.
It does take time, and I'll say it's about communication on the road. When I was in Europe, driving in Europe, I'm always amazed if you come up to a car. I was in Ireland, for an example. If you come up close to a car, they will move over and let you
Right.
pass them. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
As they do in California.
civilized.
As they do in California.
Absolutely. And even if it's on a single lane, they'll just move over to the shoulder and let you pass.
Yep.
And I also respect truck drivers a ton. And just, simple, a flash of the headlights, or you put on your hazards for a second to say thank you. It's all about communication. And if we can all get on the same page, everybody's going to get to their place quicker
Yep.
and safer.
Yep. It's interesting now that Minnesota was the 6th state, but this is coming to the country,
Yeah,
one state at a time.
I'm amazed. So I was in Colorado on April 5th when their governor signed the Colorado lane splitting law. I was at a BMW dealership. I was at a BMW board meeting. We stopped at a dealership. We're doing an event there, and every employee at that dealership knew exactly what was in that bill and when it went into effect and everything. So I do think it's important for dealerships, clubs, us as riders to make sure we understand the law, so that we're doing things the right way. But I've had a ton of people contact me from Pennsylvania, Texas, saying, "How do I do this in other states?" And I never even thought about the safety aspect of it. And so it's been fascinating to hear people's reactions.
This would be a good time for you to put your contact information so that you are welcoming. You'll be happy to consult and help people with this, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll put my cell phone out there.
Put whatever you want. This is the time.
Yeah, my cell number is 612-616-2445. 612-616-2445. Texting is the easiest way to contact me, because I'm usually traveling the country for work anyway. So that's the best way to get a hold of me. Honestly, I'm not going to give you a long email address, but texting is the easiest. But I am happy to share what works and how to make it work, and help arrange for the same thing that happened in Minnesota to happen in other states. Now, it's not going to happen. It may not happen in 3 months like it did here in Minnesota, but we can build a plan together. And I'm already talking to a few folks in different states.
And that's great. And I'm glad you're willing, because that will make a difference. My late father had a saying that anything that's worth doing is worth doing wrong the first time, and is worth doing twice.
Yeah.
And I think that's the story going to be the story in many states. I think the state of Oregon has come very close a
Yes.
couple of times, and then the governor has failed to sign it.
Yeah.
And usually the opponents of this that are lobbying against this are usually law enforcement who does not understand the benefits, the public health aspects, and how they only see riders as outlaws and rebels.
Right.
And their experience has colored that perception because a lot of motorcycling is sold that way, marketed that way.
Right.
And the other industry that lobbies against this typically in the states where it's been gone over is the heavy truck industry. And they're against it because they don't understand it. So there is a component of public education here that is critical to putting this across in your state, in any state that wants this.
Yeah. Yeah, just knowing who your opponents are going to be and how to kind of get around their talking points is going to be a huge way to keep the ball rolling, if you will.
And it is all with law enforcement and with the heavy truck people, it's education. They just don't understand the public health benefits, and they don't understand that it converts riding from a rebellious activity to a socially responsible activity. It's a step in the right direction for the country and for society. Again, that's my 1,000-foot overview that doesn't pull any votes in a legislative process, but that's the truth.
I was just at an event and was chatting with Governor Walz, and he and I have a long history of knowing each other. And at the time, he didn't necessarily know I was the one pushing the bill. He just knows when he's signing the document what's in it. And when I talked to him and I said, thank you for signing, the lane filtering, lane splitting law. And he's like, I'm getting so many kudos for signing that. This is great. And I said, good, because I think to your point, people, as much as we got it done, now we need to say thank you, and we're here to help do it the right way.
And this is in the category of law making. This is a high-profile thing that's in everybody's face. I mean, when you talk about hot issues politically, like abortion or that, you name it, there's a bunch of really high-profile hot issues. And this, because it's in front of everybody with motorcycles and traffic, this is even though it's a small little piece of positive legislation, people can get really riled up about it as if it were a woman's health abortion type thing. Even though it's not on that scale, people can get plenty riled up about it.
Well, almost everybody either goes to work, goes home, they're on the road somewhere, and so they will be experiencing this in some fashion. You're absolutely right.
I want to put in my plug, too.
Yeah.
I'm the organizer of the annual Ride to Work Day, and that's hard to measure the participation numbers, but the way we've tried to figure it out is we think it's the largest motorcycle event in the world by numbers of participants. There's no dues, there's no measurement. And we have a website called at www.ridetowork.org. It's a nonprofit organization. And on the homepage of that website is hundreds of links with little captions by each link of what it's about. And one of the subsets of the links on the homepage is links all about lane splitting and lane filtering. And there is tremendous numbers of stories, and anecdotal and otherwise, that talk about this that go back 30, 40, 50 years. So if you want to research in your state stories about passing lane splitting legislation, you can either go to the Ride to Work website and look at all those links, or call you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely. And again, I think I was participating in the Ride to Work before I even knew you were organizing it.
We were, we were two ships passing in the night. I think we're winding this up a little bit. What else do we want to talk about?
In terms of getting this done in other states, and how to go about doing this, I mean, I know we talked about this on another podcast, but, sticking to the facts, to your point, try not to bring emotion into it. It's hard not to bring emotion into talking about an accident, but don't bring other issues into it. So when you're talking to your local, you show up at a coffee shop. You go have coffee with your local legislator where they have open hours and say, hey, I support this. What can I do to help? But keep in mind, try to keep it to one issue. Don't add, I want this. Don't walk in with a Christmas list of what you want to do. If lane splitting and lane filtering is what you really want, stick to it.
Is there in Minnesota, like in the federal Congress, there's a motorcycling caucus? Is there that in Minnesota or other states?
There will be. I'm putting one together here in a minute. I mean, this whole discussion we've been talking about for the past hour is getting people ginned up about this at the legislative level. So I'm in the process of creating a motorcycle caucus, like Congress does.
Like Congress.
I would love to have one in all 50 states. And it frankly is just an effort to get legislators to, when they're passing laws, to think about what does it mean for motorcyclists. And I can tell you, since passing this law, I have other legislators come to me saying, hey, somebody was talking to me about, noise levels or helmet laws or you name it. How does that impact you and what's your position?
Right.
And so I think it's going to garner more attention around the motorcycle community, which is the goal of any motorcycle caucus, to think about what do we need to be doing next. So there's a lot of different things to look at. And I'd also say, motorcycle safety is not a partisan issue.
No.
Don't bring politics or partisanship into it. Make it bipartisan. I am, like I said in the very beginning, I am naturally bipartisan, but make sure you don't make it a partisan issue.
My experience is that this is it got all three. It's got some Democrats like it, some Republicans, and a whole lot of libertarians love it.
Absolutely. And the people who didn't like it are either some other special interest, whatever, or they have a personal, I think it's way too dangerous, they don't understand it.
Right.
But by and large, most people, when they heard the stats, kind of go, it makes sense.
It does.
And if we're going to give it a year, so we're giving it a year before it's actually in law, which is probably a good thing, is get some education out there. Right. Let's talk about this before we actually do it.
But it is important to note that everywhere but America, thanks to that Model T and going right to cars, everywhere in America, this is a normal behavior every day. This is how traffic works across Africa, across Asia, across South America, everywhere, except here.
Yeah.
So we're fixing it.
Absolutely. And I just kind of reiterate, it takes more than one person, more than one story. Thankfully you got involved, Jed Duncan at Rider Academy got involved, and more people kind of stepped up and say, yes, we want this.
Yeah, and I think we should also mention that the American Motorcyclist Association, I almost forgot to mention them. Yeah. They have full-time legislative lobbying department at the nation's capital. Yeah. And they have resources that can help also. And they're the sort of official organization of all motorcycles. Doesn't matter whether you're on a BMW or Harley, absolutely, whatever.
I can tell you a quick story about that. So AMA called me midway through session, or I actually called them, and we had this discussion about this bill, and they said, we've been trying to find out who's pushing this and how it's going so fast. And now you found out why. We even called the chief author's office, and they didn't know.
It's Batman.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and they said, you know what? We're going to let you do your thing. We're not going to get involved. And to your point, normally the AMA is leading these efforts, and I kind of took it upon myself to do it. And AMA and I, we've actually done some work since then, and they joined me at the local national rally. We actually gave us 2 seminars on this and how to do it in their state. So the AMA, AMA is going to be supporting this. They already are, but this is going to give them another push in other states as well. So I'm already helping them as well.
In closing, I have two things. If you're a rider and you have questions about this, you can go to the Ride to Work website. But the main thing is this is not mandatory. If it's legal in your state and you're riding a full dress bike and it's heavy and you don't have to do this. Right. You can treat it just like you always have. It's optional. Right. And what was the other thing? Now I've lost the other idea.
Well, that's a really good point, because I was thinking about this on the way here. There's a little bit of road construction. I'm on my RT, and I have crash bars, right? And if anything, as much as we want to say motorists in cars need to understand this law, as motorcyclists, I need to know the width of my bike. Yeah. Because I don't want to be scraping anybody's door or anything like that. So if I'm riding my RT, I'm probably not going to be lane splitting.
Right.
unless cars are going to give me more space. But I do think it's imperative to us as riders to understand our skill level, our comfort level, and just know the specifics of our bikes as well.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I'd forgotten a moment ago that I wanted to mention is if you're a rider watching this and you don't have lane splitting in your state, keep your eye on your rear view mirror when traffic accordions up because there's a congested situation ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Always watch your rear view mirror at a stop sign or stop light if there's cars behind you. It's one of the areas that there's been such a great increase in injuries and accidents due to people behind you driving with a text or otherwise distracted. So keep your eye on your rearview mirror when you're riding, if you're a rider.
Absolutely.
I got nothing else.
Awesome.
Thank you, Phil, for doing this very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your continued efforts. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you guys for watching.